Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are at the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development, Thursday, March 25th. I understand that the state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and all for public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notice that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I now note that the hour has come. And Mr. McDonald, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Squilla.
Present.
Councilwoman Brooks.
Present.
Councilmember Dom.
Present.
Councilmember Gautier.
Present.
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I'm present.
Councilmember Green.
I am present for today's conversation.
Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Jones. Councilmember O.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McMonagle. A quorum of the committee is present, and the hearing is now called to order. Before we start, I would like to recognize that Councilmember Dom for a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to have a few brief comments today. We called for this hearing with my colleagues so we could begin the important conversation of how we bring back our local economy and discuss the reopening of our office spaces, both our commercially owned spaces and our public office buildings. These spaces are essential to Philadelphia's economic recovery. I once heard our former Commerce Director, Harold Epps, say that the 10-block radius around 18th and Walnut, in 10 blocks in every direction, generates approximately 55 to 60% of our city's tax revenues. And this encompasses our major commercial corridor center city and the majority of our businesses and employees who work in these office buildings. So this conversation couldn't be more important to the city's economic future. Over a year ago now, the mayor issued a stay-at-home order.
Councilmember Dom, you went on mute after the word order.
Okay. We're now moving forward with vaccinations across the city being distributed to our businesses, and employees are preparing for a safe return to work and life as we once knew it. Of course, we know we can't go back completely to the way things were before just yet, but we're all becoming more accustomed to the safety precautions necessary to keep people safe and healthy. We need to bring back demand in Philadelphia. This is about demand. And in these next few months and in the second half of this year, if our economy is going to survive, we need that demand back into the city. I want to thank everyone here today and appreciate the time and effort that has gone into preparing Philadelphia for a safe return to work, and look forward to that lifestyle enjoyed by many of our residents and suburbanites prior to the pandemic and how we can bring that back. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Dom. Is there any other comments before we get started? Seeing none, this is a public hearing of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development regarding resolution number 210193. For the record, bill number 200382 is being held at the request of the sponsor and will not be heard at today's hearing. Mr. McMonagle, will you please read the title of the resolution?
Resolution number 210193, a resolution authorizing the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development to hold hearings examining best practices and new ideas for safely reopening the City of Philadelphia's workspaces, including office buildings, city buildings, and other high-risk congregate settings not currently operating at pre-pandemic capacity.
Thank you, Mr. McMonagle. Before we begin to hear a testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that the public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing the member for the questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we'll be using the chat feature available to Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized in order to comply with the Sunshine Act, and that the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Mr. McGonigal, will you please call the first panel of witnesses we have to testify this afternoon on resolution number 210193?
Yes, can we please have Henry Chamberlain from BOMA and Josh Dubin and Taib Smith from Pipeline Philly ready to go?
This is Taib Smith. I'm here and ready.
Henry Chamberlain here and ready.
Josh Dubin here and ready.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all. Everybody's connected now and ready to go. I guess we'll proceed with your testimony. We could start with Henry Chamberlain.
I'm going to share some slides. Good afternoon, Chairman Squilla and members of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some comments today. I am Henry Chamberlain, President of the Building Owners and Managers Association International, representing office, industrial, medical, mixed-use, and corporate facilities through 86 associations across the country and 30,000 members and participants. We've all been through a lot this past year between the pandemic and the Great Recession it caused. In June, we were looking forward to bringing our annual conference and expo to the great city of Philadelphia, and of course had to reschedule it. We'll be back in 2024. Philadelphia is a wonderful place to live and to work, and members from across North America and the world really enjoy the city and its history immensely. I certainly do. So we do look forward to getting back to business. Since the pandemic began, we've been providing guidance to our members, the property management teams across the country, on how to transition their properties to low occupancy for essential personnel to, in the past several months, gradually welcoming larger numbers of tenants back into their offices. Occupancy levels in the central business districts have been in the 10 to 15% range nationwide, with suburban markets a bit more than double that amount. A recent ADT security report cited 25% of office tenants are going to the office part-time now in different markets around the country. I would add major corporations, including Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and others, are reopening their offices this spring, as well as buying new space as they get ready to build for the future. In the past couple of weeks, cities that had severely limited occupancy and encouraged people to work from home if they could have begun to reopen and allow for higher percentages of the workforce to be in their offices. These cities include Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, and my home city of Washington, D.C. You may have seen New York just asked city workers to return in May. We have shown that with proper precautions and care, it is safe to return. Our national study of office tenants reinforced the fact most tenants see their offices as vital to their business success. Throughout this past year, they have overwhelmingly approved of their landlord's coronavirus response, as well as the amount of communications relaying what was going on in their buildings. They know we are doing the right things, and they are willing to do so as well to begin returning to work. As an example, 80% of tenants support universal mask wearing. I've certainly got mine here in the office with me here in DC. Things will look very different initially as people return. We will have multilingual signage throughout buildings, clearly communicating what people need to do to create safe environments. Other measures will include arrows on the floor to direct traffic and maintain social distancing, limiting elevator capacity while using stairwells where practical, and hand sanitizer stations throughout properties on top of enhanced cleaning and disinfecting, and mask policies in common areas. We will be providing layers of protection. We've been focused on planning and preparing for our tenants returning to their offices, ensuring healthy, safe environments. It's expected that vaccines will be widely available by May 1, and that's only 5 weeks away. And I'm evidence of that as I got my second Pfizer shot today here in DC. With greater numbers of people vaccinated, coupled with enhanced cleaning protocols, it is possible to reopen buildings with confidence that workers will be safe. As Philadelphia reopens with infection numbers dropping, it is going to be imperative to clearly communicate what is planned, and we are ready to do it. We will reinforce the best practices in building operations that incorporate CDC and local health department guidance. These plans will change in the coming months, and we will gradually return to normal operations. As we do that, we'll be modifying those things and making changes as appropriate. It's something that property managers are uniquely skilled to accomplish. For this body, know that the industry with its service providers has taken janitorial procedures to new levels, from the frequency of cleaning to the appropriate chemicals being used. We have fine-tuned mechanicals and operations with a focus on ventilation and air quality, working off the guidance of the experts in the field, the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. We are also creating new, more open spaces in our buildings to allow people to spread out, contributing to a safe environment for all. We are working with our restaurants, gyms, and other small businesses to support their operations and help them begin to recover. With very few exceptions, office buildings have never closed, and we continue to work with employers to create conditions to bring tenants back and create the safe workplaces needed to reopen the economy gradually and safely. Restaurants, retail, and public transportation all desperately need office workers to be in their offices to get back to business. The country is beginning to return to in-person work, and doing so safely with the safeguards we are taking and enforcing as the vaccines become more widely available. With a reported half of the schools in the country reopening now and buildings ready to welcome back tenants in a phased-in way, it is time. On behalf of BOMA Philadelphia and BOMA International, we are ready to support it in partnership with you. Thank you.
Henry, thank you for your testimony. We're going to have two other people testify before we go to questions. If you could hang in there for questions, we appreciate that. Next up is Josh Dubin and Taib Smith.
Thank you, Councilman Squilla and Councilman Dom and the other council members. I'm going to start and then defer to my partner, Josh Dubin. Some of you know me. I've had the opportunity to interact with you across many rooms. Give me 1 second.
Never mind. Just state your name again, Taib, before you just state it fully. I appreciate it.
Thank you, council member. My name is Taib Smith. I am the principal partner at Pipeline Workspaces in Philadelphia. We have 20,000 square feet located in the Graham Building at 30 South 15th Street. We actually overlook City Hall. I'm proud to say that I stole Josh Dubin from the city of Philadelphia when he used to be an employee of the Office in Arts and Culture. My partner, Megan Denenberg, and I became aware of co-working as a business model in 2010 when I was stationed in a co-working space that was in its embryonic stage in Northern Liberties. And I was fortunate that I saw it was an emerging model. And I pitched my partner, David Grasso, who owns the Graham Building, in creating a co-working space. But I didn't have the resources or the finance to do it. And I bumped into him in 2013, and he told me to revisit the idea. I called on Josh to help me doing analysis on creating a co-working space, and Josh discovered that there was an alumni at Penn who had one co-working space in Florida and was interested in opening a second co-working space. I then flew to Florida, met him, vetted it, got the rights for the Pipeline brand, and created my first real estate project. And we did a $2.1 million square deal for 20,000 square feet. And we have approximately 100 institutions that are based in that 20,000 square feet. All right. So the thing I'm most proud of is that we were able to keep our staff. We were able to stay open throughout the pandemic. And I can proudly say that without question, Pipeline is the most diverse co-working space in the city of Philadelphia. The reason I mention that, Councilmember Dom, you are very good at quoting that only 2.3% of the businesses in the city are Black owned, but we are 43% a Black city and 67% POC. So with me being a partner at Pipeline, I can say that we are the home of the Philadelphia Black Journalism Association. We've been the home of Knight Foundation, and we have had the benefit of being a welcoming, diverse space in the 21st century for a multitude of businesses. All right. And where I have a little bit of umbrage is that as a person who is partners in 4 companies in the city, I do not have a lobbying body for a company of my size. Because frankly, our African-American Chamber and our Chamber of Commerce lobby for large anchor institutions and corporations and not small businesses, to be frank. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to Josh, but I would ask my council people to really think about who has been the frontline workers keeping the heart and the blood running in Center City. I live in Center City, about 5 blocks, in what we like to call the 7th Ward, but white people call Rittenhouse, right? And as I've walked around Center City throughout the pandemic, most of the people who are working, delivering food, and working in the gig economy look like me. Most of the people who come in using SEPTA and the rail line and the highways, who benefit from all kinds of public policies that enable them to live in the suburbs, but benefit from the largesse of the reputation of the best city in the U.S., have not been on the front lines. So when we open up this city, I really beg of you to think of the residents of the city who look like me, who undergird our pension funds. And with that, I will pass to my brother, Josh Dubin. Thank you.
Thank you, Taib. And good afternoon, Chair Squilla, Vice Chair Dom, all the members of the committee. I want to thank you again on behalf of myself and Taib for the opportunity to speak with you today at this hearing and share what we believe are some key insights and ideas regarding the safe reopening of offices and congregate workspaces as our city begins recovering from the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Pipeline Philly, as Taib mentioned already, is a high design, flexible workspace. We're located at the Grand Building at Dilworth Park, 30 South 15th Street, right across the street from City Hall. Our space is 22,000 square feet. It includes a mix of private office suites, open plan seating, conference rooms, cafe and lounge spaces, and various other amenities. We opened the space in late 2014 as at the time the largest single co-working space of its kind in Center City. And then, as today, our goal is to provide a comfortable, productive, and inspiring space that supported a diverse community of independent professionals, startups, and teams from small and large businesses. Now, co-working spaces like Pipeline, we've experienced the challenges of operating during this pandemic from 2 different angles simultaneously. On the one hand, we are managers of a workspace. We're trying to develop strategies that will provide the dozens of entrepreneurs and professionals who depend upon our services with a safe, healthy, and productive environment. On the other hand, we are ourselves one tenant in a much larger commercial office building. And so we're dependent upon close partnerships with and guidance from building management to identify and implement the best solutions that we can. And we feel very fortunate that our partners at the Grand Building have taken their responsibilities seriously from day one. We appreciate the input of members of BOMA and organizations like that as well that are really charting a course for how to keep these buildings safe and functional. And we're grateful that we've been able to maintain open lines of communication with our management partners on every different issue related to the matters of health and safety, really for every day of the past year throughout the pandemic. Now, Pipeline has been in continuous operation throughout the pandemic. Co-working spaces were never technically designated as essential businesses, at least in any materials that I saw, but they more often than not obviously fit the description of such a business, and for several reasons. For one, co-working spaces may provide space to other businesses whose work is very much essential. In Pipeline's case, that included several different organizations, including teams from the City of Philadelphia's own fire department. We also function as an extension of the Postal Service. We are the official business address for dozens of organizations, so we receive and process all manner of mail and packages that are critical to those businesses' continued operation. As a result, even during the most fraught stretches of the past 12 months, we've seen continual use from all of these groups. And we've had a chance, I think maybe more than ever before, to really observe and learn more about why people choose to use and need to use a space like ours. And remember, we're not an employer asking people or requiring people to come into the office. The members we're serving right now are people who independently, in the midst of a global pandemic, have nonetheless made the choice to trek to our location, to enter a shared space populated with other people who are not members of their household, to utilize shared amenities and common spaces, and to pay, frankly, for that privilege. They wouldn't be doing that without genuinely compelling reasons, without a genuine need for those spaces. And so I'm going to circle back to some of those reasons in a little bit. But suffice to say, we think that our observations about how and why people have chosen to utilize our space over the past year may provide the city and other workspace operators with some clues on what to expect moving forward, at least for the short to medium term as vaccinations roll out and infection rates continue their gradual decline. At this point, I'd like to give a brief outline of some of the policies and practices that have been implemented at our space and in our building. I don't want to repeat too much of what Mr. Chamberlain covered from the BOMA side of things, so I'll just touch on some of these key items briefly, and I'll refer you to my written testimony for a more complete description. But strategies enacted at the building level include the advanced registration of all visitors through a web-based tenant services portal, division of the lobby space with stanchions to separate inbound and outbound foot traffic, reprogramming of the elevator dispatch system to assign only one person per elevator, maximizing fresh air intake through the building's HVAC system, which in the Graham Building's case was recently updated over the past couple of years, and placing automated hand sanitizer dispensers adjacent to the main elevator bank. Strategies enacted within Pipeline's own spaces include rearranging furniture to maximize personal space between users, installing plexiglass dividers in order to compartmentalize larger shared desks into individual shielded workstations, and distributing hand sanitizer, cleaning wipes, paper towels, tissues generously throughout the appropriate areas in our space. Mask use and social distancing are required throughout all common elements of both the building generally and Pipeline specifically. Those policies are supported through clear and frequent signage, and Pipeline opted to purchase the same sets of signage as building management to ensure that there was a uniform set of visual cues and hopefully encourage stronger compliance with all of those policies. When it comes to staffing a workspace like ours, one especially important thing that operators have to recognize as we move forward is that the front desk is also now the front line. Receptionists, office managers, security, and all other traditional front desk personnel, they're all going to be subjected to the same set of pressures that other frontline workers in the retail, grocery, dining sectors are already experiencing. They're being tasked with new responsibilities. They're being asked to maintain policies that may be difficult to enforce. And they're trying to simultaneously keep themselves safe while assisting numerous others. And also, while I don't have hard numbers in front of me right now, I would wager that women and people of color are probably overrepresented in the population of front desk personnel. So any lack of precaution or investment to ensure their safety is exacerbating inequalities that we know have already been laid bare and in fact deepened by the pandemic. The front desk of the Grand Building now features a substantial plexiglass shield and generous social distancing guidance. And at Pipeline, since foot traffic from unexpected visitors is now so low, we've gone a step further, and whenever possible, we will shift our staff away from the reception area and into a nearby private office or other more isolated space. We found that we can still solve a huge array of office management issues at a relative distance, and when members do require in-person assistance, they're able to request it easily. So as a result of all of these policies and all of these practices, we have experienced zero community spread of COVID-19 within our membership. Now, remaining safely open and operational over the past year is not simply encouraging for our own business. We also think it's a critical data point for the commercial office market in Philadelphia generally. While the pandemic has inflicted some short-term pain on co-working and flexible office spaces like ours, we anticipate that there's going to be a meaningful increase in demand over the long haul. Cornet is a nonprofit association of executives with strategic responsibility for real estate assets of large corporations. So essentially we're talking about commercial real estate professionals embedded in large corporations, right? So that association, they conducted a survey of all of their members this past January, 2021, so after the rollout of vaccines had begun. And they asked questions about how they anticipated their members seeing their space needs evolve as the recovery phase moved forward. 30% of respondents to that survey said they expected to increase their company's use of co-working and flexible office solutions. And that's even as they simultaneously plan to scale back traditional corporate headquarters. Now, one reason for this expected increase is driven by risk management and risk assessment. Companies believe that flexibility and responsiveness of a space-on-demand model will end up proving more valuable over time than perhaps a comparably less expensive but more rigid long-term commercial lease. But this development also has a lot to do with numerous different forces that have been changing the nature of work itself. At Pipeline, and really in our industry generally, we've had a front row seat to this transformation. It's already been underway long before the pandemic arrived. And in many ways, the pandemic has really only hastened a lot of these parts of the transition. So let me unpack that a little bit. First, there's a growing acceptance among employers that remote work is here to stay. And simultaneously, there's a growing realization among employees that home is not always the best place to accomplish that work. And I really want to underline that point. Working from home and working remotely are two different concepts, right? Now, for many people, especially during the most rigorous portions of the previous lockdowns, working remotely necessarily meant working from home. But we anticipate that working near home is going to quickly supplant working from home as the preferred option for many people in a post-COVID recovery workforce. Perhaps folks don't have adequate space to accomplish their work at home. Perhaps there are too many distractions. Perhaps they lack access to necessary amenities that they need to run their business or do their jobs effectively, like reliable high-speed internet access, enterprise-level business machines, reliable mail and package reception, ergonomic furniture, etc. So those folks will be looking for an alternative workspace. Similarly, even after campuses are widely reopened, we expect an increasing number of college and graduate students may opt for remote learning, even after all that stuff reopens. And so many of them are going to need clean professional spaces with dependable amenities for everything from studying, tuning into classes, taking online exams, delivering dissertation defense via Zoom, all those sorts of use cases. And again, home may not offer a solution to all of those challenges that we outlined. So those are two examples of what we think are more novel sources of demand that we're going to see for workspace. And beyond that, we expect those new sources of demand to converge with another wave of startups and entrepreneurs who, just as we saw after the financial crisis a decade ago, are going to take economic upheaval as an invitation to strike out on their own, create something new. And I want to emphasize that last part too. A robust supply of safe and flexible office space stands to benefit all businesses, large and small. Our membership at Pipeline includes solo entrepreneurs, freelancers, right alongside teams from huge organizations, Fortune 500 companies, and they all derive meaningful benefits from access to a commercial office space and from access to each other. We think these trends actually offer some exciting policy opportunities for the city and for all those who are focused on economic development. For example, I know in the past, I believe the city's Department of Commerce had introduced programs to financially incentivize larger companies without existing Philadelphia presence to establish satellite offices in the city. I think as we look forward to this coming recovery phase, perhaps some of those programs could be revisited with a greater focus on, let's say, the population of newly remote workers who live in the city and who may need to identify appropriate workspaces. Because whether it's one company bringing in 100 people into an office building, or whether it's instead 100 disparate remote employees from different companies, all converging on the same flexible space, it still is going to boost foot traffic and provide a critical lifeline to surrounding restaurants and retail businesses. So as I said, we see some exciting opportunities there. When people do gather in an office setting, the reasons they gather may also be different than they were prior to the pandemic. We anticipate that on occasions when physical presence is expected in the office, whatever that schedule looks like, those occasions are going to center less around individual responsibilities, which can often be accomplished remotely. And instead, they're going to focus more on types of creative, purposeful work that then benefit from, and in some cases require, face-to-face collaborative engagement with coworkers. And this will also have an impact on the types of spaces they need. So there was some speculation early on that the pandemic spelled an absolute end to open plan designs forever. We still believe they actually have a critical role to play. Spacious conference rooms, lounges, event spaces, other open designs are going to be crucial in the post-COVID office because they're going to allow for team gatherings that are appropriately distanced, that are comfortable, and that are conducive to collaborative work. All of this is to say, the reopening conversation can't focus solely on changes to physical space and building infrastructure and cleaning routines, as important as those are, and they are very important. But more than ever, I think landlords, employers, businesses all have to focus and ask themselves some pretty big questions about what happens and what is expected to happen inside these office spaces, and to consider how the built environment will either collide with or will complement the nature of work moving forward. So in closing, I want to emphasize that Pipeline grew out of a belief in the power of face-to-face interactions in a professional setting, and the knowledge that simply working side by side with others in a space over time can really help to spark innovation, solve problems, build relationships, foster dialogues, and create genuine value for everyone. Today, we remain just as dedicated to our vision of a vibrant office environment centered around engagement and camaraderie, and we're ready to help our peers and neighbors in the Philadelphia business community achieve the same result. So thank you for your time and attention, and we look forward to answering any additional questions that you may have.
Josh, thank you for your testimony, and Taib and Henry. It's a breath of fresh air, knowing that the challenges are there, but I think we have to look at this as opportunities of opening safely, how we could do these things, and looking at a bigger picture, because we know we're going to be in this challenge. It's not going to end in the summer. It's going to be a challenge moving forward. So we have to be able to look at how we open up safely and what protections we can put in place, not knowing what's going to come. And I think your testimony has led us to those points. So thank you so much. Councilmember Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your testimony. My first questions are for you, Mr. Chamberlain. And first of all, thank you for being here and testifying. And the president of Boom International. Very impressive to have you here today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Councilman.
And my questions are, I think I heard in your testimony, and correct me if I'm wrong, that other cities have opened up their office spaces slowly, gradually. Like,
Yes.
I think you said Boston, maybe Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, maybe I think you said even your home city of Washington, D.C. When you say they've opened up, roughly what kind of percentages, or is it spacing, or how'd they go about doing that, and what could we learn in Philadelphia from those openings?
Well, yeah, they're doing along with reopening the schools gradually, restaurants and capacity for gatherings in the city, targeting really 25%. But I will say that tenants aren't quite ready to come back in those numbers yet. So it's coming back gradually. I think the best thing we can do is to be very clear in what people can do, what the procedures are that people are taking the precautions around. And so the tenants can really plan against it. Companies can as well. There needs to be some lead time. I think the cities that have had some difficulty are ones that said we're open, and I will pick on states to the south in this country. They've simply said we're open. The companies weren't ready for that. The tenants weren't comfortable with that at all. So I think it's important to say what the return looks like in terms of percentages, and then the property management teams can say, well, here are the things we're doing to ensure that your workforce is going to be safe when they come back to the buildings, and how our building is set up.
And I think you mentioned in your testimony, you mentioned Apple and Google and maybe Facebook are expanding their footprint in office spaces.
Yeah.
And is that happening across the country or only in certain select markets with tech companies?
It's happening closer to their headquarters areas now, but as you know, Amazon's bought space here in Washington in recent year, but there's some bargains out there in the marketplace now. You know, we're going to be rebuilding over the next year, 2, 3 years. And they're seeing that as an opportunity as they expand their businesses. So you see the big tech companies expanding their space. Mr. Dubin was talking about flexible options. That's part of it too. But, you know, and to a big degree, people want to get the extended teams together for the camaraderie, productivity, the creativity, the bonding. You know, you're bringing on new staff. They want to know their team. So flexible space is an option. But the companies are investing in both models and expanding right now.
You brought up an interesting point. I've talked to several firms. When someone graduates from school and they join a firm, they don't have that mentorship if they're not in the office together. They lose that whole mentorship, whether it's a law firm or any other type of industry. They lose that camaraderie with the older members of that firm, and I think that's important. One last question for you for now, and that is, have you seen any kind of trend of what's going on in the office market as far as the renewal of office leases, and are they keeping the same spaces, reducing, increasing? I've heard different stories of some companies having to increase because they need more space between people, and some that are reducing.
Yeah, there's an array there. I would say just to start, around the country, what we're estimating is about 100 to 150 million square feet are being given back. And that'll be playing out this year as companies do consolidate. Some of that's economically driven. Some of that is people with leases that are coming to a conclusion who want to downsize a little bit. The feeling is that you'll probably see some downsizing in the 10% to 15% range on spaces. They're also going to look for that flexibility. Some will be open conference rooms in the buildings that exist. Some will be, Mr. Dubin's company in terms of what they can provide for companies as well. We were driving down to smaller spaces per worker. Those open spaces and hoteling, we're getting down to 125 square feet per person. Well, that doesn't work well at all when you want flexibility and the ability to spread out. So even though we've got rooftops and outdoor areas and Wi-Fi enables a lot of that, there's a feeling that we're going to want to be able to spread out to 150 to 200 square feet per person. So the part we've got to figure out is telework, right? What percent of the workforce are we going to let to work from home, and then how often? Will it be a day a week for some? Will it be 2 days a week? There's a lot that's going to play out, but the feeling is that there'll be an initial reduction, and then we'll start to expand again. And if you look at Bureau of Labor statistics, they see 6 million new jobs over the next 10 years net. Many of them are building services, and a lot around medical, and the entrepreneurs, the gig economy was mentioned, the people that are going to create the new value. So we are going to grow, but it's going to it's going to play out in some interesting ways over the next couple, 3 years.
Is there any concern by BOMA? I'm hearing a lot of office users are not extending their leases like before, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year extensions. Many are doing a 1 or 2 year extension because they're just not sure where the economy is going. And I guess my question is, when I think we're seeing more of that in the market, how will that play out with the lenders? Because lenders love to see the longer term extensions. Is there any concern from a property owner on the lending side when they have a lot of short term leases?
Well, of course, the good news is they are extending their lease for a year or two while they figure it out. The banks really play off of the cash flow out of a building. So as long as you've got them locked in at least for a year or two, you can create the NOI and then the asset value for that building. Longer term, we will see. We were moving towards 5-year leases away from 10-year leases in many markets. We'll see where it settles out, but I think it'll get back to something in a normal range, but probably in 22, 23.
Okay, well, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Chair, I do have some questions for Taib and Josh. Okay to ask?
Sure. Councilmember Green, one second, Councilmember. Councilmember Green, did you have any questions for BOMA?
Yeah, well, I actually have some questions for both BOMA and Mr. Smith and Mr. Dubin as well.
Okay, well, all right, Councilman Don, again, if you want to just finish your questioning, then we'll go to Councilmember Green.
This is for Taib and Josh. And before the pandemic, I don't know if this is accurate or not, I had heard there's over between 500,000 and 550,000 square feet of office space in the city that was co-working space. And I'm just wondering, coming out of this pandemic, that's an important part of our economy. We want to make sure we preserve that. Do you have any idea what that's going to look like coming out of this pandemic? Have there been any closures of any of these companies that we need to learn about and be focused on to try to help them?
So I like to say that Josh is the bullet point killer, so I'm going to defer to him. But before that, I do recall that at one point, you may have heard of a little company called WeWork that is undergirded by SoftBank. And Josh had alerted me at one point that we had as many members at Pipeline at our height than they had in 3 co-working spaces, right? So one of the complications of being a small business that has to compete with businesses that are actually playing a game of market share, as that one of my frustrations is that our business improvement district for Center City was working on behalf of WeWork to bring them into market, right? But not thinking that you have a company that's founded and based in Philadelphia that you're actually lobbying against when you bring in that international partner and then direct large corporate partners to the out-of-town company that is undergirded by international capital versus investing in your local partner to grow them up. And Alan, I would just also say that when you look at the lease that was given to Starbucks on city property across the street from La Colombe that was founded in Philadelphia, we have an algorithmic problem. We often overlook our local businesses for international businesses that have no loyalty to the marketplace, because as soon as the market changes, they're going to close and be out.
Hear you. Josh, you're on mute, I think.
So, yeah, I'll piggyback on some of the things that Taib said. 2 points, I guess. First of all, with regards to the sort of the state of the market today, we have seen over the past 12 months, we've seen some co-working spaces, both large and small, close, including a WeWork location on, I believe, 15th and Walnut above the Cheesecake Factory there. But we've also seen spaces open. A large operator just opened up a space at 123 South Broad, I think, about 24,000 square feet. So I think it really comes down more to model your own particular business. And that brings me to the second point, which is also, while part of the model is financial, a lot of it is also, and I think it's softer terms to work with, but when you talk about loyalty to a space, loyalty to a co-working space, to a brand, to a business, our impression has always been that people are not loyal to space or to furniture or to an address. People are loyal to people. And so it really does come down to how you build your community in these spaces, how you shape that, the active role you take in nurturing that community. I think in the wake of the WeWork debacle, those softer selling points, the community aspect of it, maybe got a bad rap. I think they sold it the wrong way, but I don't think it's not true. I do think that community in these spaces is vital. And what we're hearing from a lot of our members now is that that's one of the things that they miss the most. Again, just as Mr. Chamberlain was saying, people are desperate to get back into the office because they miss their mentors, they miss their friends, they miss their comrades. It's the same thing in our space here. Even though these folks don't work for the same company or work on the same projects, they still miss seeing each other. And they still feel a loyalty to this community and this group. So for us, that's been a strength. And a lot of times when we have seen folks, terminating their memberships here, it's not because they don't need the space or don't want the community anymore. It's rather just because of strict financial constraints. It's something where the business is suffering to a point where they just can't maintain the membership right now. And so they're forced into it as opposed to rather looking at it as something that's disposable. It's just a choice that they have to make.
Let me ask you guys another question. First of all, I've been up to Pipeline several times. You do a great job up there, so thank you for the performance you're doing. Question I have is that I view these co-working spaces, especially Pipeline, as kind of a birthplace of entrepreneurs, where entrepreneurs can get a start, where they can grow a business, and then it's almost like where executives who may be retired, or getting towards the end of their career, can come and get their second life there, and they're energized by the people in that space. I mean, energized,
So, Councilmember Dom, thank you for that, because you're actually defining certain members who have been in our space. And Josh is better with names than I am, but there's always I'd say a senior member who's found his second life in our space, and they're usually gentlemen who are the first to show up. They leave early, but they're almost escaping, let's say, the atrophy that you would have at home working alone. So I've seen several entrepreneurs. I've seen a couple people even invest in younger people's businesses, whether with actual capital or being a strategic partner or a mentor or an advisor. And it's really important for entrepreneurs to have the opportunity to have an intergenerational space. From early in my career, when I was in some early models of what evolved into co-working, we were all figuring out and bouncing ideas off each other, but we didn't have the more senior level expertise that you could go to. Within Pipeline, we have multiple law firms. We have law firms that specialize in alcohol law, some that do healthcare, multiple that do real estate. We are a home to the Philadelphia Cultural Fund. We were a home to Knight Foundation. As Josh mentioned, we've been the interim home to some city institutions when they were trying to reimagine their office spaces or caught between leases. And I think for business in the 21st century, the opportunity to be nimble or have the opportunity to ebb and flow with your business. And I'll pass to Josh after this thought, but when you're a small business, sometimes through contracts, RFPs, or just the ebb and flow of business, you might have 7 employees, you might have 10, you might go down to 3 partners. But within a co-working space, you can expand to a second office. Some people can be 2 days a week. You can have people that have desks. And in the 21st century, particularly small businesses need the opportunity to have that nimble agility in their capital stack or their annual revenue, where traditionally you might have been tied into an anchor lease for 5 to 10 years that you might have to wind down the company because you're just over your skis in terms of expenses.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add on to what Taib just said, but I agree with a lot of it. And I would encourage you, again, like he mentioned, we've had the privilege of hosting several teams from the city in our space. I would encourage you to reach out to some of the employees that have used our space over the past couple of years and get their opinions on what worked, what felt right. In a lot of cases, these city folks will come in not knowing what to expect, not being certain about the environment they're walking into, coming from a more traditional setting. And they leave with their eyes really wide open and really impressed about what we're doing here. And again, the connections they've been able to build Instead of being siloed in one department, in one building for the entire time, they're interacting with, I think, a broader network of people than they otherwise would have. And especially for an organization like the city, I think that can be really useful. You're basically doing constituent outreach in the office. So I think it's been remarkably helpful for a lot of these different teams that have used our space to help innovate and get a new perspective on some of the work they're doing and how it actually impacts the lives and the businesses of the constituents that they serve.
Thank you. I just want to mention, Henry, I don't know if you know this, but many of the businesses that got started at Pipeline expanded and leased office spaces in office buildings throughout the city. They grow the businesses and they move into the office buildings, which is great. It's a great pipeline. That's actually a great pipeline for the city.
They're wonderful incubator.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely.
So let me just, one last question. This is a lightning round answer because I know we're short on time. If there was one thing, the city, many of my colleagues are on this call and are listening, what could we do as a city to help these small businesses expand their business and be more successful? If it was one thing, what would that lightning round answer be?
So, Josh, I'm gonna jump in here. Alan, you remember a couple years ago when the city and all the select Greater Philadelphia, the chamber, all the anchor institutions got together to do the bid for Amazon? We spent millions of dollars, right? We've never done an analysis of the local homegrown businesses and put that type of energy into promoting them regionally, nationally, and internationally, right? So as a Black businessman, when I'm talking to investment capital, whether I'm talking about our real estate business, our co-working business, or my agency, there's a lot of aspects where in the Black community, we say you need to see it to be it, right? So for capital investors, family offices, and people who are thinking about investing and the new future and the new demography of the nation, if you don't see somebody who looks like me, you can't imagine the wealth that exists, not just in Center City, but in our actual communities. So if we could use the largesse of our advertising dollars, the largesse of our procurement dollars, the largesse of our collective voice as a region to put on sunlight and a razor focus on lifting up homegrown businesses versus trying to attract businesses or investing in entities that every city has. Not to beat up on sports hospitality versus arts and culture hospitality, but every city has a stadium, every city has a team. Not every city has a Barnes collection. Not every city has a Tierra Whack or the Roots or Freeway or Sonia Sanchez or Marian Anderson or W. Du Bois or Paul Robeson. So if we can't imagine how to invest in homegrown things like the Coltrane House, like Sun Ra's house, we will never have the opportunity to reap the benefits of what's actually here.
Thank you.
One of the challenges of working with someone who thinks as similarly as you do is that a lot of times they can take the words right out of your mouth. So I'm gonna echo what Taib said. I think if we put half as much pride into our local businesses, into our local institutions, as we do to our sports teams, I mean, man, there's nothing that the city couldn't accomplish. So I'm going to leave it there. But yeah, I echo everything that Taib just said. I think we have some amazing resources that don't get the attention they deserve. And pride matters.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Councilman, I would say the thing we need to do is get people back to work. We need to get tenants back into buildings so that we can create the jobs and create the revenue. And I think we've got to take the stimulus money that's available and invest in schools and get them reopened so that parents can get back to their jobs and the kids can get back to education, which they need. And we also need to invest in the vaccine and get it distributed as quickly as possible so people will trust mass transit. It's not that mass transit isn't clean and safe, it's people wonder who they're riding with. So if we could get the schools reopened safely and show people that it's safe to ride mass transit, we can create business and get back to it in the city of Philadelphia and elsewhere.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the panel for their testimony this afternoon. It's been very enlightening. Very seldom do I have a Thursday afternoon when I can have a connection between Paul Robeson and Sun Ra. And, or, you could have easily gone from P&B Rock to Black Thought to Kenny Gamble. But That just shows the diversity of your music perspective. But I definitely agree with you from an arts and culture dynamic. But I'm curious for this panel, and Councilman Dom kind of hinted some of the questions I had, but I'm going to dive a little deeper. I'm going to start initially with the American Rescue Plan. My colleagues know I'm very involved as a board member for National League of Cities, and the city of Philadelphia will be receiving over $1 billion from the American Rescue Plan. 50% will be able to draw down in 60 days. The other 50% will be able to draw down next year. The dollars have to be spent by 2024. So on this topic of what we're talking about, how we can bring back the city of Philadelphia, what would be your suggestion to the administration, city council, on how we spend those dollars in order to bring back our economy? The mayor provides his budget address on April 15th. So I'm curious in your thoughts regarding that, especially in the context that last year we had a $750 million deficit that we had to fill for FY22, which starts on July 1. We have a $450 billion deficit. And you're talking about over $1 billion coming to the city of Philadelphia, half this year, half next year. I'm just curious on some of your thoughts on how those dollars could be targeted for some of the things we've been talking about this afternoon.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. So there's so many different directions that I can go in that, but I think we do have a challenge as a municipality and having a lot of missing investment opportunities and money flowing into remedial technical systems programs and workforce development programs that teach people how to get hourly wage jobs, but don't put them in the 21st century economy or into the innovation space or into what I would describe as a capital stack. So not opportunities where you're going to own anything, not opportunities where you're going to grow a business, but opportunities where you're going to be a part of the wage, frankly, the slave labor force of large corporations. And we have an algorithmic problem that in our inner city cores, not completely unique to Philadelphia, but complex, that a lot of our infrastructure was designed in the era of white flight. So there are people who've been economically locked into structural public policy that didn't allow them to participate in the 20th century economy. And now it doesn't allow them to compete in a supposedly meritocratic market. So what am I saying there? The average third grader in the city of Philadelphia, 30% read on grade level, right? You do not have that in the western suburbs. I believe children in the western suburbs get about $25,000, per student. In the city, we might get $13,000 or $14,000, but we can allot $30,000 to $50,000 to incarcerate those students in the middle of PA later in life. All right, so there's a lot of different directions I can go in when you make and ask about that. But then when there's $1.7 trillion coming to cities, are those dollars going to go to white-led institutions to give people remedial programming for them to be employees? Or is that those dollars going to go into businesses that have the opportunity to scale and to provide a living wage and to give people the opportunity to create wealth? I would be happy to have a deeper dialogue with any council member or any council member staff about existing programs, existing entrepreneurs that don't get the sunlight from our 17 CDFIs in the region and some of the institutions that have been in place for 30 or 40 years, but have not been able to crack the code on how to help somebody start a business. And I speak frankly because I am partners in 4 ventures, all based in the city of Philadelphia. I am a kid from North Philadelphia with a GED. I am a veteran, and most of the institutions in the city couldn't have done anything for me at any point of my trajectory in the last 20 years. And I say that frankly, and I would challenge anybody on that point who would like to talk about that in a public forum.
Okay. To any other panelists, your response.
Taib drops the mic. I'm going to leave it on the floor.
I have to agree with career development, educating folks and giving them the talents they need for the jobs, and to be the entrepreneurs of the future. Everything we can do to invest in education and training and do it across the board is just gold for the communities and the economy.
So I'll follow up with another question. Because of my work, both here in the city and throughout the Commonwealth as president of Pennsylvania Municipal League, I've had a chance to talk with colleagues who are mayors and council members of other jurisdictions. And I'm curious, from your travels, what are you seeing that other cities are doing in reference to coming out of the pandemic? I've often remarked some of the marketing and tourism I've seen from Baltimore that even started as early as late last fall. That was spent during a Monday Night Football game, to talking about Visit Baltimore from a tourism and cultural perspective. And then recently I did a tour with members of council and the GM of SEPTA, and saw another advertisement at our renovated Independence Hall stop on the Market Franklin line at 5th and Market, also advertising people that come to visit the amenities in Baltimore. So I'm curious what you may have heard or seen through some of your work in other jurisdictions. I know, Mr. Chamberlain, you're in D.C. D.C. has a much larger budget than we do, but I'm still curious to hear what any of you may have seen is happening in other jurisdictions on what they're doing as they try to come out of this pandemic.
Well, the first thing they're doing is reestablishing the fact that they're opening up the city and that it's safe. The hospitality industries are beginning to promote come into the markets. The Hiltons, the Marriotts, the others are assuring that. Of course, we've got the cherry blossom coming up, and they're saying it'll be safe in the city. The messaging that I'm seeing around the country is we are going to control the crowds. I don't use Florida as an example, but if you look at Washington with the cherry blossoms, we're going to make sure that we can spread out, that it's safe, that the city is open, that the restaurants are reopening. You've got to establish there's a reason to come back. And I think we're beginning to do that around the country. You see that in Texas, California, San Francisco is letting people know that they're now open for business. The restaurants outdoors, some indoor seating, but come back. So it's a build, but you've really got to market the fact that you're open for business, but that the hospitality sector is back up and running. That's a big key element of all of that. And people question that and have. It's been a long year.
I can comment on Florida a little bit. We have several locations, 6 locations outside of Philadelphia. Pipeline has 6 locations in Florida, including 3 in the Miami-Dade market. And while in some respects it's comparing just because of the disparity in public health and policies that have been implemented in each state, one thing that's become sort of a major headline sort of event in the press down there is that there has been a migration to Florida to some degree. There are a lot of businesses. We've seen stories about some high net worth individuals choosing to locate their businesses or their residences instead of Wall Street or New York or California, things like that. And so we've been trying markets to take advantage of those natural trends and try to market spaces specifically to businesses that may be considering relocating in Florida. And want to get their feet on the ground, real cost, just until they can get themselves established. They're doing similar things here in Philadelphia, specifically because we also been a net flow of ability to market themselves to, again, a new crop of remote workers that really can choose to be anywhere.
Actually, to speak to that, Councilmember Green, Josh is right. There's been a tremendous amount of New Yorkers who've moved to South Jersey, the Philadelphia suburbs, Mount Airy, Northern Liberty, South Philly. I've had colleagues I haven't spoken to in years hit me up for virtual meetings, and then I find out that they actually have moved in with their parents for a period of time and then decided to stay in Philadelphia. There is an opportunity in kind of revigorating an energy of not just Center City, but neighborhoods, and some type of program to really get people to consider a buy local perspective and invest local. And then we also have the opportunity that Philadelphians are incredibly prideful. even people who I like to tease and say, you're not from Philadelphia, you're actually from Bucks County, but now that you live in LA, you claim that you're from Philadelphia. All right. So if there was some kind of way that we could galvanize that energy of people who have a love for Philadelphia, but don't really have a place to hang their hat in terms of investment. And with e-commerce, just to speak for a moment, some of you might have seen that Harriet's bookstore, Black woman-owned bookstore in Fishtown, actually somehow she finagled herself onto the Super Bowl for free media. All right, so Philoprint is a company that does jerseys, mugs, all kinds of stuff. They were listed by New York Times as one of the best Black businesses to purchase from through e-commerce for New York Times' holiday gift guide. Right, so there are a bunch of businesses in Philadelphia that have great products that haven't figured out how to attach their brands to international commerce. And if there's some way we can connect those dots to advertising, to procurement, and to opportunities to all benefit from the collective power of Philadelphia, I think we have a lot of shared opportunity that we could then take to Select Greater Philadelphia, take to the Chamber, take to Visit Philly, take to the Global Identity Project, and give them a better footing about how to promote the city from a genuinely diverse, intersectional, and historically correct perspective.
Well, I could keep going on because I have a bunch of other questions, but I know we have some other panels. But this is definitely very important because some of the things that all of you have talked about reminds me, and I think the earlier part of your conversation was very interesting from both, from all of you, in reference to how business goes forward. You have the concept of, and I'll give law firms an example because I'm very familiar with law firms being an attorney, where the concept of being together has always been a big part of being a law firm, and very many firms were very resistant to the hotel concept. However, the pandemic, like a snap of a finger, caused that to have to occur. Same thing with telehealth. And so now, as a result, you're going to see a different dynamic going forward. You're going to see more hoteling and those type of things, as Mr. Chamberlain talked about. But as Mr. Smith and Mr. Dubin talked about, you're also going to see a need for more space for people to be able to do and have opportunities and have some of the hoteling be in locations like Pipeline. So it reminds me of a similar perspective of, and I'll date myself a little bit, VHS versus Betamax, where you had two competing perspectives, and it was curious to see which one was going to take hold. Technically, Betamax was a better product from a technical perspective. However, Sony limited Betamax to just certain things. There's only so many times you can see Superman the movie. Versus VHS was on a wide range of opportunities, and that became where it happened. And so we'll see this type of dynamic play out in reference to companies reducing their space, more working from home, but also needing to work near home and possibly be in a co-working space like Pipeline. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. And it's going to be very incumbent for the city of Philadelphia to be able to navigate the trends and help to promote what's going to be best for the city of Philadelphia, especially for the industries that we have located here and what's best for those industries. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, panel, for your comments today.
Thank you, Council Member. And for the record, before we go to the next panel, I'd like to mention that Council Member Johnson and Council Member L are also present at the hearing. Thank you. If you want to hang out to listen and maybe answer any other questions, you're welcome. We will now call the second panel. Ben Shank, Greater Philadelphia Hotel Association, Kendra Moore, Sustainable Business Network, and William Carter from the Chamber. Ben, if you want to just state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony, and we'll go in that order, Kendra, and then Bill. William.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Squilla. Good afternoon. I'm Ben Shank, General Manager of the Four Seasons Hotel. I'm here on behalf of Greater Philadelphia Hotel Association to share with City Council how our hotels have safely reopened the skeleton of our business, and we continue and safely expand our services during this pandemic. Thank you, Chairman Squilla and Councilman Dom, for allowing me to testify today. In my role, I lead a dedicated team of over 300 individuals who come to work each day striving to perform at the highest level to support each other. As hotel and hospitality workers across the city have experienced, the COVID-19 economic shutdown has presented steep challenges with closures, capacity limitations, and unfortunately, furloughs and layoffs. But as an essential business, I'm extremely proud that each of our hotels has what we've done to keep our colleagues, guests, and visitors safe in these difficult times. I'm also pleased that our workforce has stepped forward with volunteer efforts over the past year to better our community. As the committee examines best practices and new ideas for safely reopening the City of Philadelphia's workspaces, I'd like to share just 5 different points. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, travel and tourism has been one of the most impacted industries. According to Tourism Economics, as a result of the halt in travel and tourism in Philadelphia, occupancy last year fell 60%. A staggering 31,000 Philadelphia hospitality jobs were lost, which was a 66% decline from 2019. And currently, despite the advancements made in science and healthcare, including a greater command on treatment options and the vaccine rollout, Philadelphia hotels still have 50% fewer employees as compared to 2019. We stand ready to partner with you and our hotel community to combine all resources and our depth of knowledge to successfully put our industry back on track and our employees back to work. Four Seasons Hotel, and I know many of our other citywide hotel brands, have actually partnered with medical experts to rewrite our brand operating procedures with health and safety at the top of mind. And with hotels throughout the nation and the world, we possess valuable insights and experiences that allow us to safely and successfully operate across local jurisdictions that often have different approaches to COVID-19. And I can tell you, I was on a call earlier this morning with Johns Hopkins Medical that has worked with Four Seasons, and we do a bi-weekly call of getting updates and insights that's shared of best practices around the globe. As you consider adjustments to citywide capacity restrictions, time and visibility is of the essence for us as we plan for the future and compete against hotels outside of this city of Philadelphia. Our business model requires weeks, if not months, of advanced lead time to book business and carefully plan events. Currently, we're losing business to hotels situated just miles away that are permitted to operate under less stringent guidelines. The lost business hurts our employees in food and beverage, housekeeping, front desk, audio-visual, valet parking, bell staff, and on and on. The lack of transparent guidance on when certain citywide restrictions will be revised, coupled with neighboring cities and states loosening their restrictions, is a significant impediment to our future business prospects, and oftentimes potential clients for these events are simply unable to discuss their business with us. This has long-lasting consequences on the city and as the multiplier effect of the hospitality sector contributing to the local tax base supporting these essential functions. Please know we want to be part of the solution and truly appreciate dialogues like this. We applaud the efforts of the city in the safe and cautious approach to reopening, and we also recognize that any move towards loosening current guidelines needs to be done at a measured pace. To that end, we appreciate being invited for a collaborative approach in the coming days to continue subsequent granular discussions about how to reopen our industry safely. We have been disappointed in oftentimes a one-size-fits-all approach that's been taken in certain instances, like business meetings being grouped in with large social events. We're pleased to recently provide suggested guidance pertaining to successfully serving food and beverage at business meetings. And I appreciate that this was heard by city leaders and that the guidance was modified just this week. And we ask that we're heard on similar topics moving forward. Our shared goals of safety and the betterment of our hotel employees will allow us to proceed together toward reopening solutions. As a hotel community, we've sat before the City Council before, and we know for sure that you hold our employees' safety and well-being in the highest of priority, just as we do. We're confident in the safety measures that we've put in place and that we've ensured our employees to feel safe too. Our hope is to continue to collaborate in these coming days so we can give our employees the security of their jobs that they so desperately need. I truly thank you for the opportunity to be here to testify, and look forward to answering any questions and being a partner to successfully achieve our shared goal of reopening safely for the betterment of our employees, our customers, and the city of Philadelphia. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Appreciate your testimony. We'll hold all questions until the two other panelists speak. Kendra, if you're up next, if you just want to state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Thank you, Committee Chair Squilla and Vice Chair Dom, committee members, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Kendra Moore. I'm with the Sustainable Business Network of Greater Philadelphia, and I'm here to offer testimony on Resolution 210193. I will keep my comments brief per usual, and certainly invite the committee to review my written testimony, which provides further details. So as we all know, my colleagues today have mentioned, COVID has imposed a heavy toll on our communities and the economy, particularly on local independent businesses and historically marginalized communities and business owners, which remains central to our recovery. And while it appears that we are turning the corner on COVID, which is good news, it's also important to keep in mind that we are still in a pandemic and in the midst of administering vaccinations and monitoring the spread of variants. Therefore, it's critical that the city look to science and scientific experts when developing and implementing a clear roadmap to safely and sustainably reopening workspaces. And although our members have suffered major losses due to the pandemic and are very eager to help lead the recovery, they understand that thoughtful planning and coordination are required because the health and safety of their employees and customers is a primary concern. And there are many challenges associated with safely and sustainably reopening these spaces, and our members have found that there are very few clear-cut answers or one-size-fits-all solutions. And as such, I wanted to present to you a few suggestions. So first, in addition to relying on the science, the city should create an advisory group of diverse local independent businesses and other stakeholders like frontline workers in a range of sectors who can ground truth practical considerations for certain guidelines. And as Taib and Josh highlighted, this advisory group should look like the city. So the voices of Black, Brown, and minority business owners are central to this conversation. And building on this suggestion, the city should consider the differences in business size, sector, clientele, and other factors when developing and implementing its plan and associated guidelines. It will also be important for the city to identify cost-effective, environmentally responsible solutions that enhance safety and provide adequate lead time in order to implement changes. The city should also provide clear, consistent, readily accessible guidelines in multiple languages and with visual aids. This will enhance implementation, avoid confusion, and unintended burdens as business activity resumes. And we believe that the city should leverage business service organizations like SBN and others, and trusted community-based groups to help disseminate information. And because the safe and sustainable reopening process involves multiple areas of policy, resources, and regulation oversight, the city should coordinate and integrate its actions both vertically and horizontally as it develops a plan. For example, the city should align this plan with relevant programming for at the Office of Sustainability, for example, and the city's zero waste goals. Furthermore, as part of the reopening process, we continue to ask the city to incentivize socially and environmentally responsible business practices through tax credits, procurement preferences, and other economic incentives. Another example here, air ventilation and energy efficiency retrofits. They'll likely be in higher demand, so the city should promote commercial property assessed clean energy, or CPACE, and restructure the tax abatement as a tiered reward for constructing and retrofitting buildings according to energy efficient and green standards. And lastly, as a general matter, the city should seek ways to promote the expansion of the renewable energy and energy efficiency sectors. HVAC systems have come up quite a bit recently, and we continue to call on the city to look to those sectors which have clearly demonstrated their growth potential in the years leading up to the pandemic. Thank you again for the opportunity to address the committee and share these suggestions. As usual, SBN appreciates your consideration and looks forward to working with you all to safely and sustainably reopen our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra, for your testimony. We're going to have, before we ask questions, we're going to have one more person testify. But Councilman Dom, I do have to step away for a few minutes. If you could take it over, Mr. McLanigal will be guiding you through this. So Mr. Carter will be the last one in this panel, and then in the third panel we have Dr. Farley, and that will be the end. So I do have to step away for a little bit, but Mr. Carter, if you just want to proceed, state your name for the record, and Sean will send Councilmember Dom also the script for the end if necessary. So appreciate your time, and looking forward to hearing your testimony, Will.
All right. First of all, I have to say, you got to love Philadelphia and its tremendous, tremendous potential. I mean, you have a commerce hearing where you have hip-hop name drops from Freeway, and I have to give a shout-out to Taib for wearing the Wu-Tang hat. And you just have to love the potential and greatness of diversity of this city council and this type of hearing and talking about it, bringing back inclusive growth to this city. So I appreciate you, Councilman Squilla. I appreciate Councilman Dom for having this hearing, and appreciate, of course, my fraternity brother, Councilman Green, for his comments on this. So William Carter, Vice President of Local Government Affairs for the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. Once again, good afternoon. The Chamber of Commerce is engaged in a new partnership among government, business, and the community focused on creating jobs for city residents. As Philadelphia prepares to emerge from the lockdowns the COVID-19 virus necessitated, it's good news to hear that vaccines are being deployed and that officials at all levels of our city government are working to speed up the rate of that vaccination. Likewise, as the region begins to open, we need to ensure a focus on getting people back to work. Recovery will require an almost constant dialogue between our public officials and business leaders to unlock the keys to our city's competitiveness. So obviously this hearing is very timely. Towards this end, the Chamber, along with the city and a broad, diverse coalition of employers and other organizations, recently announced our collaborative initiative entitled Ready, Set, Philly to provide reliable information and direction to encourage support and promote the safe return of Philadelphia for work and play. This 12-month endeavor will harness the collective resources, knowledge, and encourage, support, and promote the safe return to Philadelphia for work and play. Ready, Set, Philly will harness Philadelphia's knowledge, power, and spirit to encourage, support, and welcome employees, residents, patrons, and visitors in safely returning to Philadelphia for work. We focus on 3 short, medium, long-range efforts: reopening and relaunching our economy, restoring our well-being, and ultimately redefining what we want Philadelphia to be post-pandemic. Inclusive recovery, followed by swift growth, will only occur when all parties work together to advance operating budgets, regulations, and local legislation that will allow sizes and all sizes of demographics of business to grow. We look forward to continued collaboration with our government and our government partners and our organizations and nonprofits to do this in the safest way possible. So thank you for this opportunity to testify on this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Thanks for your testimony. I do have some questions, and I'll see if any of my colleagues have any questions. Ben, I wanted to start with you, if that's possible. You know, it goes without saying that our hospitality and, as you said, our business travel industry has been impacted probably the largest way possible in this pandemic. Clearly, hospitality and, restaurants are starting to come back now, but hotels are still struggling dramatically. So, I appreciate you and the Greater Philadelphia Hotel Association being part of our hospitality work group and for the advocacy work to help our hotels survive during this downturn. To that end, can you talk about where other cities are in their regulations for businesses or events at hotels? For example, are they allowing meetings and food beverage services? And can you lay out where rules and regulations stand in Philadelphia for your industry?
Thank you, Councilman Dom. I would say we are one of the most constricted cities as it comes to regulations. We recently shared some stats with the city that when it came down to meetings and events, we were, of the 10 major competitive cities, as well as the surrounding, be it Baltimore, Delaware, New Jersey, we were the only one as of a week ago that could not serve food and beverage. So we are pleased that we now can serve food and beverage, but I will say we have a long ways to go in regards to a comparative nature. Indoor dining is significantly greater in other cities. That's a huge part of a guest coming to stay in a hotel. If you think about a family, and I have 3 children, and extended family that wants to travel together and so forth, being able to have that as part of your hotel experience is significant. And when we only have 25% capacity within the restaurants, it makes it very difficult for people to want to come and stay here, quite frankly. So we see encouraging demand that's out there. I know people want to come to Philadelphia. It's the perfect time right now as we go into with nice weather and all the promotions that are happening. But I think I would just say, I think we could be better at diving a little bit deeper into all of the different microcosms that go within our business, that again, we can work together to come up with the right parameters that will be safe. And we're seeing it, as I mentioned, we have learnings from all of our sister hotels, as well as all of the other major brands in the city, that they're learning from what their colleagues are doing in some other areas that might have looser restrictions, but we all still have our own very high sense of standard in terms of we want to protect the experience for the guest and we want to protect our employees as well.
Are you saying that cities like Boston and maybe New York and other cities have less strict requirements than Philadelphia?
That's correct.
And what was the reason you were given for that requirement?
I can't speak to the rationale. I mean, again, I understand that we want to take a cautious approach, but yes, we are behind in regulations compared to other cities.
Because it sounds to me like we heard from BOMA, where we're behind on opening up office buildings, and now I'm hearing from hotels, we're also way behind or at the bottom of the category. I guess we're going to hear from Dr. Farley. He may have some answers for us later in his testimony. So I'm sorry to hear that, and we'll be happy to work with you to try to help mitigate those issues and see if we can get you open safely as quickly as possible. Thank you. My question for Kendra, and Kendra, I really appreciate your focus on all the initiatives that you've laid out in your testimony. And I'm not sure, you're probably aware, but one of the things that we've been working on with Congressman Evans is a tax credit for improvements to like the HVAC systems that meet with the CDC guidelines, so that we can get hopefully a dollar for dollar tax credit for those buildings and industries that install those systems. Are there any other types of incentives that we should be looking at that would be helpful to the smaller businesses and medium and even large businesses that would help get them back on track? And we could maybe go to the federal government this time and ask for some sort of a tax credit in order to see those systems installed and get the economy back on track.
Thank you for that question, Vice Chair Dom. And SBN did sign on to a joint letter, I believe, that you sent to Congress with that request for tax incentives for HVAC systems in January, I believe. So we are hoping to see something like that come through. Without having, a specific tax incentive or reduction in mind here, I do think that, as I said before, investments in the energy sector and working with the Energy Authority, for example, on what works, for instance, Solarize Philly, which is maybe less about HVAC systems, but it has been touted as a model that the rest of the state should use. So I think that there are ways of being creative about working with the energy sector to both safely and sustainably use those ventilation systems, which, as I'm sure you know, increases energy consumption. How can we offset that? Is that something that, for example, a tax abatement, sort of a tiered reward system for installing more green or clean energy solutions in buildings and retrofits? Perhaps that's a way that we could look into incentivizing that sort of business practice.
I'd be curious to know if you have any of those ideas offline to let us know, because I think that encouraging people through tax incentives is a good way to make some change. So, Will, the chamber, you had your big lunch today with the mayor. I watched that. I'm sure many of my colleagues watched it. It was a very good program, by the way. Very good program.
Thank you.
So I know the chamber has spoken with many of my colleagues, I think probably all of them, about the Ready, Set, Philly campaign. But could you expand upon the features of that plan a bit? Like, what's the plan for each of the three areas you're focused on? Reopening, relaunching our economy, restoring our well-being, and redefining what we want Philadelphia to be post-pandemic. What's the vision?
Certainly. The major vision of Ready, Set, Philly is collaborative process, working together. That's something that we at the Chamber have been preaching pre-pandemic and then also going through pandemic. It's going to take all of us together working in concert to get out of this. And so I heard one of your other panelists earlier talk about not working in silos. And we continue to work in silos to a large degree. And Ready, Set, Philly is really about the government sector, the public sector, and our nonprofit sector working together, and our private sector, bringing people back to the city, particularly our core business area. That's a large percentage of the jobs are in that area. And we wanted to make sure that we were out here leading. You had Councilman Green talk about Baltimore and how Baltimore was attracting folk. And so part of Ready, Set, Philly is a branding campaign that we are ready, set for people to come back. You have to brand the city just like you brand any business. You want people to come to your restaurants. You got to brand it. You have to have it out there. And so this endeavor led by Angela Val over at PHL CVB is all about that. Rebranding, making sure that people know the city is safe to come back to patronize, and that, hey, in order for our city to come back, it's necessary to come down to our city. So that's really what it's about. And we need to continue to work in collaboration with our private and public sector in order to make that happen.
Is there any type of branding that we've really focused on, bow and arrow approach, for the suburbanites who would commute into the city? Is 41% of our wage taxes are suburbanites, I think. Right. To explain to them, city's safe, it's good to come back, we want you back, that where we could distribute through the companies where they work to get them back into the city. Because a big part of our economy that we've lost is that 41% of the population that used to spend 40 hours a week in our city and now isn't here at all. They're not spending a nickel or a dime in the city, and then they're not even paying wage taxes because they're probably applying for refunds. My focus would be, how do we get them comfortable to come back into the city, because they are so important to our economy?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Part of that obviously is the branding, but it has to be the behind that is that it's actually safe. And so we understand the mayor and Dr. Farley talking about safety, but we also understand that so many business owners out here are just as safe and want to be safe. There's no way they want to be branded themselves as, oh, your business is not safe. Why would you even want that? Particularly in this age of, social media and things, to be luring individuals back and then to have your place not safe is not what anybody wants. So I think there has been, and I think the city is doing a good job. I think they are more understanding that our private sector aren't just about dollars. They want to make sure it's safe. They want to make sure that the city comes back. And so working with SEPTA, working with our transit organizations, and making sure that people know it's safe to get on SEPTA. I've been on several calls with Leslie, who runs SEPTA, and she is talking about, hey, we got to make sure people know that it's safe to get on SEPTA, to come back and patronize the city. The city, bottom line, is an anchor. It's been an anchor for years for this region. And if your anchor is not strong, then the region is not strong. And so we have to make sure that people know we want you to come back. We need you to come back. I'm talking about the city government also recognizing that, hey, we have to lure people back with you talking about tax credits and things of that nature. Any type of tax credit will help right now, because just like me as an individual looking to relocate somewhere, what I want to do, I want to make sure wherever I move to doesn't cost a lot and I have opportunity to grow. And that's the same mindset that businesses have when they look at our city or if they stay in our city. I want to be able to grow and it doesn't cost a lot. And so it's important for, members of the government, which they do, I believe, to understand that we need to be branding the city in that way and making it more attractive and to be able to retain individuals who are here.
And a big part of this, I guess, is the vaccinations. That's really key, getting people vaccinated.
Yeah, absolutely. And the vaccinations is huge. I mean, as the vaccinations come out, I mean, that just goes without saying nationwide, globally. That's an important part. And we appreciate, once again, the health department's efforts in making that happen. Once you have those vaccinations, or while you have those vaccinations, it has to be a simultaneous thing. One thing I've learned after 16 years working in city council and now working in the business sector, it just runs at a different pace. And so, it's just natural, we have council sessions and where businesses have quarters and they have to be able to forecast, and forecast is based on certainty. And you need to know, okay, I'm certain that this is the way it's going to be for the next 4 years so I can grow my business. And so when we have constant, sometimes cost add-ons to businesses, that makes them shaky and makes them want to, not want to either stay here or move somewhere else. So we would need to just sweeten the pie a little bit. I think that we are working towards that. I think looking at this budget, you asked a question earlier about what can be done. Looking at this budget, we want to look at a growth budget, something that allows us to grow so we can hire more individuals from the city and also do business with more local companies from the city. And that's one thing two things that we're focusing at the chamber: reskilling and hiring 5,000 individuals over the next 18 months, and then more thereafter. We're talking about city residents. And then also doing more procurement with local Black and brown businesses to grow that sector also. That intention is there. We are walking that talk. And then we want to make sure that we're working with the city and attracting more businesses to come here so that they can grow.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Any questions from my colleagues? Seeing none, I want to thank you all for your testimony today. And I'd like to ask Mr. McMonagle to please call the next panel. And thanks again for your testimony.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can we please have Dr. Farley, Health Commissioner, please? Dr. Farley?
I'm sorry, are you calling me to testify now?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Councilmember Squilla, members of the Council Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. My name is Dr. Thomas Farley, and I'm the Health Commissioner for Philadelphia. I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony regarding the safe reopening of the City of Philadelphia's workspaces. I'll give testimony for the entire administration. Representatives from Risk Management, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Public Property will be with me to answer your questions. The COVID-19 epidemic is far from over in Philadelphia. While we are tired of this virus, the virus is not tired of us. On average, more than 400 city residents are now testing positive for the infection every day. More than 100 are being hospitalized from the infection each week. More than 20 are dying from the infection each week. While I'm hopeful that vaccination will ultimately tame the epidemic, it is clear that we have not vaccinated enough Philadelphia residents to stop the spread of the infection yet. Workspaces are indoor spaces, often with low levels of ventilation, where people gather and can transmit the infection to one another. To limit spread in these settings, both the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the City of Philadelphia have had restrictions on the use of workspaces. Currently, the Commonwealth sharply restricts in-person operations of businesses, ordering that, quote, unless impossible, all businesses must conduct their operations remotely. Because the City of Philadelphia may not be less restrictive than the state, those restrictions currently apply here as well. At the same time, the city is acutely aware of the devastating impacts of COVID-19 on our economy, including the compounded challenges to Philadelphia offices and workspaces created by shifts to remote work. According to the Commerce Department, in the fourth quarter of 2020, vacant office space reached 15.4%, up from 10.6% 1 year earlier, or equal to a 45% increase. The Commerce Department suspects that office vacancy may get worse before it gets better. Tenants may be understandably reluctant to make long-term real estate decisions in an environment where so much remains unknown about reentry and vaccination timelines. We also understand that the lack of office workers in Center City depresses other economic activities in the retail and hospitality industries. If the Commonwealth were to lift this restriction that work must be remote, quote, unless impossible, unquote, the limits in Philadelphia would still apply. For office-type workspaces, the currently applicable executive order of the mayor permits occupation of workspaces with a density limit of 2 people per 1,000 square feet. This is about 25% of maximum occupancy of a typical office. The executive order permits businesses where remote work is impossible to continue to be able to work in person at their current densities. If the governor's restrictions are lifted, safety measures when employees return to the office are centered primarily around distancing and mask use. Under draft guidance from the Philadelphia Department of Public Health that would apply, if workers return to offices, face masks must be worn at all times unless individuals are alone in private offices with 4 walls and a closed door. Masks would be required in all other spaces, including workspace cubicles. Masks should be removed only while actively eating or drinking 6 feet away from others. In addition to restricting the number of individuals in an office at any given time, distancing also can be achieved by closing all communal eating spaces and removing chairs so that employees cannot gather together unmasked. Meetings should continue to be held remotely as much as possible. The guidance also encourages building managers to optimize ventilation, outdoor air infiltration to the greatest extent possible. Finally, hand washing should be encouraged and surfaces in the office space should be cleaned regularly according to CDC guidance. Screening policy should be present in all workplaces to prevent people who are sick and those who are quarantining from coming to work. Sick leave policy should be present so that people who are sick or have tested positive for COVID-19 may remain home and avoid affecting others. A document on our website entitled "What to Do if Someone Tests Positive for COVID-19 at Work" can help to guide businesses to take the appropriate steps should someone in the workplace become sick or test positive for COVID-19. The Department of Public Property has been working since the beginning of the pandemic to ensure that City of Philadelphia facilities are safe, and the building management team is trained in the latest safety protocols, as evidenced in the return to work handbooks included with this testimony. To provide a brief summary, masks are required in city buildings, and public services are being conducted by appointment only, coordinated with security, and are being staggered to protect both staff and the public. In addition, there are advanced and enhanced cleaning procedures in place, hand sanitizing stations installed throughout the buildings, upgraded HVAC filters as per the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineer guidelines, increased preventive maintenance routines, increased custodial staffing, the installation of plexiglass barriers at public entrances and throughout the buildings where warranted, signages at all entrances and elevator lobbies reminding occupants of safety guidelines, and limited elevator occupancy. The Department of Health monitors case rates, hospitalizations, and deaths every day in order to determine the safest course of action. As vaccinations increase, we hope that COVID case rates and deaths will fall. If they do, we intend to increase allowable occupancy, but it is necessary for us to remain flexible. New information and unforeseen factors make it difficult to predict or plan very far into the future. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Forley, and thank you for everything you've done during these, past 12 months and before that, because I know this has not been an easy time for any of us, and I know you're doing your best to try to guide us through this. I do have a few questions for you. We understand that Philadelphia is a unique city with unique challenges. And just wondering what your thinking is about when to reopen. I heard some of your comments about some of the things that might start to reopen April 30th. And I say that, on the backside of the governor's announcement about reopening plans starting April 4th. And I respect your concerns totally how Philadelphia is different from the rest of the state. But I also want to understand how the administration's standards are developed. And I'll also add that I saw an article a few days ago that New York City announced on May 3rd it would gradually start bringing back municipal workers who've been working remotely since the start of the pandemic. So can you give me an idea from the administration's viewpoint and a timeline for bringing the city workforce back into the offices? And what indicators are you looking for to signal that that risk is low enough to allow us to safely bring people back?
Yeah, so as far as the indicators that we're looking at case rates, we're looking at hospitalizations, and we're looking at deaths. And I would say even more so than in the past, we're looking at hospitalizations and deaths. Because if we're vaccinating the right people, we're vaccinating the more vulnerable. And so it's possible that we could still have cases, but people are not getting terribly sick if we're vaccinating the right people. And so it's looking at people with severe illness that is particularly important now. Now, the sort of time on the factors that made us think about the April 30th deadline for relaxing some of the restrictions was looking at our trajectory around vaccinations, where I estimate that if we continue accelerating, as I hope that we will, and as I think we ought to be able to, by around April 30th, we should have about 75% of the people over age 65 vaccinated, assuming the demand is there, and about 50% of all adults vaccinated if the demand continues to be there. Now, as far as the workplaces, I do want to emphasize that the state's restrictions on workplaces apply in the city of Philadelphia. This is one case, maybe the only case, where the state has been more restrictive than the city. The city would, as I said, allow workers to come back to the workplace up to 2 persons per 1,000 square feet with restrictions. But the governor's orders are quite strict now. That's a very high standard. Must work from remotely unless impossible to do so. And so I think that's where we are right now. We are okay with 2 persons per 1,000 square feet with restrictions. In May, if those indicators get better, we might be willing to restrict that further. And the city workers would come back at the same time that we allow private sector workers to come back.
Thank you. A few other quick questions. I'm hearing from public health officials that they're revising what they think the threshold is for herd immunity up from 60 to 70% as high as 85%. What level of immunization do you think we'll have to get to reach that herd immunity to ward off infections?
I think nobody really knows how many people we need to vaccinate in order to really make the virus go down to very low levels. It's based upon mathematical models. There's a lot of uncertainty to these models. So I don't know any more about that than what you're reading, that there are ranges estimated. I frankly am worried that we have enough vaccine hesitancy in the city that we may never hit that threshold. Surveys suggest that, 35% of people say they don't ever want to be vaccinated. And if we end up that we only vaccinate 65% of people, but you need 80% of people to herd immunity, that means we'll have a substantial amount of COVID still spreading in the community. So all I'm going to say, we're going to do everything we can to persuade everyone to be vaccinated. And then we'll simply have to watch to see what happens to the case rates when we do that.
Another question. This is a comprehensive bit. I'm trying to understand how the health department is reviewing the vaccination schedule and its relationship to the restart or recovery or economy. And here's an example. How we are categorizing who's an essential worker in the various classifications of the vaccination plan. I ask this because we found out earlier this week that airport workers were not in the 1B category, nor are our frontline office staff that helps keep these types of commercial buildings that we talked about today clean and safe. And then today in council, like Councilmember Greenwald, I'm sure will speak to this, there's a classification of people who have disabilities or aren't getting vaccinated, which I kind of think all those categories should get vaccinated. So I'd like you to share with us why and why won't they be considered in that 1B category?
Well, there's a federal advisory committee on immunization practices. They made recommendations about essential workers and put them into 2 categories of frontline essential workers and then all other essential workers. Then we had a local vaccine advisory committee that took that and made some modifications based on the situation in Philadelphia. But the ranking was similar and the listing is similar in Philadelphia to what it was at the national level. And the basic idea is that frontline essential workers are people who are interacting with the public a lot on a day in and day out basis. The one I think about the most would be like a grocery store clerk, someone who's checking people out. Lots of opportunities to get infected, lots of opportunities to pass the infection on. There are other essential workers, let's say, who are utility workers. They're very essential for society, but they're not in contact with the public very much. And so they would be more in the 1C category. That was the thinking between those 2 groupings.
We heard from the airport that New York and Newark Airport, their employees were vaccinated. And, we're hearing from the hotel people they're struggling. We're hearing that the airport business is way down. And I'm just thinking that if the other area airports are getting vaccinated, Why not Philadelphia? That's really my question.
Yeah, well, with regard to the airport specifically, let me say that the state of Pennsylvania doesn't have essential workers eligible at all yet. So we're ahead of them as far as making essential workers eligible. And most of the airport workers, they may actually work outside of Philadelphia, and many of them live outside of Philadelphia. And there's many different sorts of airport workers. There may be some airport workers who have a lot of contact with the public, and others who are doing maintenance on planes, and they're working, they're important, but they're not in contact with the public. And so, if there's a subcategory of those that really have a lot of public contact, I think that's appropriate for us to consider whether they should be in 1B. But for the entire group, that would be a large group. I should also point out, though, that we're not that far away from Phase 1C. I said we're going to go there sometime in April, and it could be early April. So pretty soon it's not going to make that much difference.
I would suggest maybe you could relook at those three categories that I spoke about: airport workers in general, office maintenance people in the high-rise buildings, making sure they're vaccinated so people feel safe coming back. And then Councilmember Green, I'm sure, is going to speak about the category they talked about in council today. Those are all categories that we should be vaccinating, in my opinion. So I'd just like you to think about that. Let me ask my last question. What is the current fully vaccinated rate right now in the city of Philadelphia?
Well, it's on our website, and I always have to look it up myself. If the denominator is everybody, and remember, not everybody is even eligible, but if the denominator is everybody, we are somewhere between 7% and 10%. I don't know the exact number, but it's on our website. It's a higher percentage if you think about just adults who are eligible, and higher still if you look at people over 75 or people over 65. And those are the numbers that I am paying the most attention to right now.
So in the United States right now, 14% of the population is vaccinated. From every article I've written, or not written, but read, 14%. So I'm wondering, why would we not be on the federal government, President Biden's doorstep saying, hey, if the rest of the country is at 14%, why are we not getting more vaccines? I realize this isn't your role, but I'm just wondering why we're not getting more vaccines to at least be at where the average is for the United States. Right. If they're at 14% and we're at 7 to 10, that doesn't seem fair to me.
Yeah. So it's we have argued for more vaccine because, as you know, somewhere between 25 and 30% of our vaccine, maybe more than 30%, have gone to people outside the city of Philadelphia, but our vaccine is given to us based upon the Philadelphia resident population. And also, we need not just more vaccine, but we also need more vaccination capacity, people to deliver the vaccines. So the federal government has supported us with the Type 1 site, and that's been a real success. And so if you notice, there's a big difference between our partial vaccination rate and our complete vaccination rate. That's because we put a lot of people through the convention center who've just gotten that first dose yet. When they get the second dose, our complete vaccination rate will rise pretty quickly. But we need all the support we can get. It's not easy in a big city like this to get everybody through and vaccinate them.
Last question, which is a combination question. Right now, with the convention center switched to second vaccines, basically, second shots. Yes. What would you say, estimated wise, what is our rate of weekly first dose shots right now? Because we have a lot of people getting second dose shots. What are we averaging per week right now for the first dose?
I haven't calculated in terms of first dose versus second dose. Overall, we are delivering more than 100,000 doses per week. A couple of weeks ago, we were about 50,000 doses. So we've had a big acceleration. I'm going to guess that there's more of those that are first than second, but I don't know of that 100,000, how many are first and how many are second.
And my other concern you mentioned is the resistance of residents in our city to get vaccinated. That's a real concern. I mean, we have to figure that one out. And I don't know if it's marketing or what it is, but we have to get people comfortable, I think, with getting vaccinated.
I couldn't agree more. Right now we're dealing with the proportion of the city that are really eager to be vaccinated and having trouble meeting that demand. But not too far off, we're going to be in the opposite position where we're begging people to be vaccinated, lots of opportunities, and not everybody's coming in. We do have a mass media campaign that's in development right now. We hope to launch that soon. And we're working with opinion leaders of all sorts and hope to have the opinion leaders also be in many ways reflected in that campaign to encourage everyone to be vaccinated.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. I know my colleague Councilmember Green has some questions. So Councilmember Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask some other questions, but you opened the door regarding my comments earlier in council. But I'm going to ask my first questions in reference to the issue, Dr. Farley, that you talked about regarding immunity. From my understanding and some recent reading I've been doing from my National League of Cities work, the president is now pushing for a more significant testing plan going forward to try to help, I guess, provide testing and kind of screening in as many ways as possible, both in workplaces and education locations, so we can really start to identify who is positive for the virus. Not just I think I'm positive, so now I get a test, but just doing much more robust testing like we saw in other countries last year. Has your office started to see any concepts of that, which would be a real way of combining both getting to the point of vaccinating everyone that wants to get a vaccine, and then we're focused on those who are reluctant to get the vaccine, to having a way of doing screening and testing in a lot of different areas so that we can really isolate who may be infected with virus?
Yeah, we have been doing a lot of thinking about how do we improve not just testing, but what happens after testing as well. Because, as I said, times testing by itself doesn't solve anything. It's only what you do with that information. And what we think is the most important is the contact tracing and then the isolation and quarantine. And so that is a package. And in order for that to work more effectively than it has in the past, I think it has to be much quicker than it was in the past. Because if it takes someone 2 days to 3 days, once they have symptoms, to get a test, and then we get the result back 2 more days later, and then it takes us another day or two for us to reach them on the phone, they've already spread the infection to other people, not much benefit. But if people can get tested within a day of them having symptoms, and we can call them within a day, and then start the contact tracing within a day, then we really stand a chance of getting people in isolation or quarantine so that we stop the spread of infection. So yes, we're working on that. I will say right now, almost all of our containment staff have been redeployed to vaccination, but we hope to bring them back as case rates go down, vaccination rates go up, get them back into doing more promoting of testing and contact tracing. And the emphasis really is going to be on speed, getting the results, make it so people can get easily tested quickly, and the results get to them quickly.
So, in your response to a question from Councilman Dom, you made the perspective, and I agree with you in this perspective, that in a short period of time, I think we'll get into a point where those that want to get a vaccine will be able to get a vaccine. And I think you said we're not that far away from phase 1C perspective. But my concern is that, and I talked about this early in council, this kind of perspective and gray area that I understand, from your perspective, I gather that prior to this point, there was a real concern because we had a limited vaccine supply and not want to just open the floodgates and say as many categories as possible, people could get vaccines. And I think that's part of the reason why the city didn't move to what the state did in reference to the age category, because of the concerns of not getting people super ramped up to get vaccines when we just didn't have the supply. But that seems somewhat contradictory when you're saying that, in a short time period, we'll have enough vaccines for as many people that want them, and it's more of a concern of those who won't get vaccinated. So when you look at the areas I talked about today and have been talking about, in reference to those on the autism spectrum, those with intellectual disabilities, which has now been moved into the 1B category, and I think probably primarily from Dr. Ross and Dr. Gleason's report, but I think people who have developmental disabilities also have the same perspective. And when people register, we're not people registering based on the fact that they are self-identifying what their situation is. If they're diabetic, if they're an essential worker, we're not doing a rigorous screening of them in that perspective. So help me to get a perspective on these kind of cross-cutting statements and perspectives we're in right now.
Yeah. So we're in a stage now where we're doing a lot of vaccination, and there's going to be a big ramp up, I would say, in the month of April. May 1st at the latest, but probably will be May 1st is when we'll open this up to all adults. And so there'll be probably a lot of people coming through then who are relatively low risk. And then probably not too far after that is when we're going to be where we have more vaccination availability than we have people who are interested in that. So a lot's going to happen between now and, let's say, early May. At the moment, we're still the case where demand is exceeding supply. And we have a problem where people who are low risk but want to be vaccinated are still finding all sorts of ways to try to get into the vaccination sites. So we're still trying to reserve vaccination for people who are at greater risk for becoming seriously ill or in a position to acquire the infection and pass that on to others who are seriously ill. So as far as the medical conditions, I've had many different groups that sort of advocate for one or another medical conditions be included in the medical conditions that qualify you under 1B. We started out with the list that the Centers for Disease Control had written about. These are the ones that are established that put you at higher risk for infection. We have added some based upon scientific evidence that that wasn't available to the CDC before. So intellectual disabilities, there was an excellent paper done by the folks at Jefferson, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Made a case that people with intellectual disabilities are very high risk. And so we took that to our advisory committee. They said absolutely bring them in. The developmental disabilities is harder because it's on quite a range, including some people who are on the autism spectrum quite functional and physically fine, probably at fairly low risk, and then others who are more on the severe end of the spectrum that might be greater risk. So it's a harder group to classify. I think everybody's going to be eligible fairly soon, but we are reluctant to continue to add groups unless there's some strong scientific evidence right now for that group as a group being at high risk.
But that evidence and that research is being conducted now, and I would venture that once that information comes out, it'll be very similar to the ID community. And I guess my concern is we're not talking a huge population. I mean, you were able to move people in the ID community onto phase 1B based on this research. I venture there's probably research out there right now that I'm not familiar with, that I have not had a chance to do that level of research that would say that those in the developmental disability community are on that same perspective of more susceptible to positive transitioning because of this pandemic. And so I guess that's what's so troubling is that there's mixed messages. There were messages that back as early as January 22nd, when I had a meeting with the health department, that people were being told that if you are a home caregiver, you would be in phase 1A. Even though the question that was then lingering was, what about my child does not have Down syndrome, but we're not sure they're in phase 1B. But then I also heard from those who said if you register your child saying they have neurological challenges, they could get registered on a phase 1B. So what has happened is that those that have the level of advocacy and information and resources and ability to navigate are able to get their loved one into a vaccination scenario, when those that don't have those same level of advocacy or information or resources are not, which creates, I would say, an imbalance from an economic perspective for those that have a child on the autism spectrum but have a higher level of income are more likely to find a way to get their child vaccinated. But those that do not have that same level of income, that may be a single parent that has a child on the autism spectrum, even if they are severely impacted by their learning difference or developmental difference with autism, are not able to get a vaccination.
Yeah, so the group did look at this issue of developmental disabilities, and there is quite a spectrum, and there is a very large.
Dr. Farley, I'm probably more educated than you on how large the spectrum is for developmental disabilities.
I'm sure you are. I know this is an important topic too. And I'm sure you are. But it is a large group, and there probably are many people in there who are not terribly high risk. Those that on the severe end of the spectrum that also probably would have intellectual disabilities, and you know more about this than me. Right. If they have intellectual disabilities, then I would say they qualify.
Right. Yeah, but I guess there's ways that I think from a registration perspective, even in the developmental disability community, and there's a large range from those who are Asperger's to those that are nonverbal. But I think in the registration process, there's ways to identify to minimize the population. If someone says they're on autism spectrum, and then are they verbal? Are they nonverbal? So there's ways that you can shrink that population to then still make those people eligible. Especially now when you're saying that, well, by May 1st, everyone that can get, well, we're assuming based on supply, but more likely than not that by the early part of May, anyone that wants to get a vaccine will be able to get a vaccine.
All right. So I'd be happy to look at, is there a subset of people with developmental disabilities that are on the severe end of the spectrum that effectively, to our best information, their risk is the same as those with other disabilities, and see if that's a way we can define them and identify them and see if we can make them eligible.
And I'll close with this. I think this makes us as a city look bad from the perspective that here we have a situation, and I don't want to put this information out in public, but a organization within the city of Philadelphia that has a sports team that is focused on autism has partnered with a provider that's outside the city of Philadelphia that's providing vaccinations for those that have intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities like autism, for their self-advocates and for their caregivers in the city of Philadelphia.
So I could say, that we want everyone to be vaccinated, and it's not easy for us to figure out, okay, which ones are in which group or which time. We relied on the best available science. We've had an advisory group. This is where we are. We'd be happy to look at that question further.
Well, I'm going to continue to revisit this issue because it just doesn't make sense from my perspective, and we're going to continue to talk about it. That was not going to be my focus of this conversation regarding the committee. I was going to have this conversation with you separately, but my colleague opened the door, and so I thought it was important to at least start the conversation, well, continue the conversation that we've been having. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Green. Dr. Farley, just a couple of follow-up questions. Right now, you mentioned that you have a shortage of output, I believe, right? What can we do to improve the output of the vaccines?
We need to have more providers, and we need to have the providers we have deliver more vaccines. And we're working on all of those. So we have more pharmacies, for example, that are coming on board every week. We have clinics, including some primary care physicians that are coming on board. We have the Type 1 site. As you know, we're talking to the federal government about having additional federal support for sites. We just need to accelerate that process as quickly as possible.
And just to mention this, I think Massachusetts, because you mentioned about the section of the population that is leery of getting vaccinated. Massachusetts had a program, I think, if you brought somebody to be vaccinated over 75 years of age, you would be vaccinated also. So they're trying to get younger people to be the advocates for vaccination. Just mentioning it to think about it down the road, it might be a good tool.
Thank you.
To convince people, yeah. So listen, thank you for your testimony today, Dr. Farley. Keep up the good work. We appreciate your efforts. And I do have two questions for, are there any other questions from my colleagues in this panel? Okay, I do have a question for Tom McDade, who I think has been very patient on the call. There he is.
Councilman Tom, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So there's one question for you. We saw this reopening plan for the triplex. I think it was done jointly with JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle, and the city's presentation. And I appreciate you setting that along. And can you walk us through the plan just briefly as to the features of how we'll manage city workers coming back to work safely?
So as you know, we have over in, for instance, the Municipal Services Building, we have had, from the very beginning, we've had to provide services to the folks in the city, like, for instance, at licenses and inspections, revenue. So there was a brief shutdown in the very beginning, and then we had to get services up and running again. So we implemented all of those back to work safety mechanisms from the plexiglass and at the security desks, the social distancing markers, plexiglass all through the counters you would see in the concourse where they're servicing folks. So we're simply going to follow all those things. I think we're prepared with staffing. We have an increased staff handling the high touch points, much like our folks from Mr. Chamberlain and Mr. Dubin were talking about. We're doing the same exact thing. So as the crowds increase, and we've seen a little bit of that, it's been by appointment only so far. But as we start to increase some of the folks coming back in, then we'll just handle it just like we've been doing so far.
Okay, and there have been, I guess, some people coming into our offices in City Hall, and has that been in a generally safe way? Have we had any issues or any problems that you're aware of?
We have not. Occasionally you'll have someone who forgets a mask, and our security staff will stop them and provide one to them, and they're often on their way. So, no, we really haven't had any problems, Councilman.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here and answering these questions today. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you. I have a question for our Commerce Director, Mike Rashid, if he's still on.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Oh, how are you? Good afternoon.
How are you?
And you did a good job today on the chamber event. So,
Thank you.
So here's our question for today. What strategies can you share with us that Commerce has developed for reassuring businesses during this time? And are there supports in place for communicating standards and regulations to building managers across the city? You know, with both COVID and the acts of violence and the civil unrest in the city this year, I want to make sure we have people in place to help communicate and support businesses that are returning to work. You know, we want businesses to know Philadelphia is a good place to conduct business, and after this unprecedented downturn in daily activity, and make sure people feel good about coming back. So how is Commerce involved in this recovery?
Thank you, Councilman. Since I've been here, which is going on 3 months now, our major effort has been to try to increase the level of communication and coordination with businesses. The restaurant business, BOMA, the hotels, as many, and I don't want to forget, which we tend to forget, the businesses on the commercial quarters. So I personally have had a number of tours, most recently in Councilmanic District 8 of this week, as a matter of fact, talking to business people, trying to listen to them, hear what their issues are, and trying to resolve them. I think you may know in the case of the restaurants, we met with them at least 10 times. And I think we were successful in getting the health department to loosen some of the restrictions that they earlier came out with. And it was a result of a lot of discussions. And where we are now with the restaurants, the standards that you see now are a result of a lot of give and take. We've had, to a lesser extent, but also with BOMA, a lot of great discussions. And I think what you heard the commissioner say a minute ago is that the standards that we have now are less restrictive than where the governor is, and we're ready to implement those standards, but we can't because of state rules. So we want to talk, we want to communicate, and we'll continue to do that.
And can you be an advocate, like when we hear other cities have offices open, or other cities have their airport people vaccinated and we don't? We really need you to be that advocate for the economic recovery of this city. That's so crucial. For example, like the restriction of the airflow, I'm told by the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association that the restrictions that we put on for airflow to go from 25 to 50%, we're the only city in the U.S. that required it. And of the restaurants that could comply, only 200 and something, 202 or 205 could comply. And I think you may have mentioned this to me, that 2 or 3 were black and brown restaurants. So that seems really difficult.
Well, I think it's fair to say that we are an advocate for them. The numbers that you hear now in terms of restaurants that have been certified, especially the racial and the demographic rates, we really don't have a way to know, because when restaurants are certified, apply for certification, we do not ask them about demographics, what race they are. So if anybody is saying what race they are, it's because they may recognize the name of the restaurant. I recognize a couple of names of African American restaurants, so I can say that, but that's not scientific. But we do know. Here's what we do know. We do know that we put out about $13 million earlier this year for restaurants to be able to get their ventilation systems up to par, and we're putting out more money now, about $18 million, to help restaurants even further to get their ventilation systems up to par. So we expect that 136 number, which is on the health department's website now, it will increase dramatically. But they have to get the money and they have to remediate their systems, and then I think you'll see that number increase.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your answering the questions today. Thanks for being here today, and again, great job. And Dr. Farley, I didn't mention, but good job today to Dr. Farley too on that chamber poll. You both were on that. I thought you both did a good job. So, thank you. Are there any other questions from my colleagues? Well, thank you for your testimony, or thank you for answering the questions, and thank you to the panels that have testified today. And hearing none, I want to thank all the panels and witnesses for their participation today. We value your opinions, and this concludes the business before the Committee of Commerce and Economic Development today. I want to thank you very much for your attendance, especially on behalf of the chairman, Chairman Mark Squilla. Thank you very much.